Welcome to the worst nightmare of all. Reality.
Explore the lesser-known stories of our unknown world. Join the pursuit of the paranormal with Ash and Greg.
Hi Ash, how are you doing?
Not bad, Greg. How's tricks?
Yeah, not bad, thanks, not bad. So today we are joined by Sage, who is from Steel City Ghost Hunters over in the US. Welcome along, Sage.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for coming on and speaking with us. So I come across your TikTok account, which has come up on my For You page, and as people who listen to the podcast will know, we're fairly new to TikTok, and we're not, well, I'm definitely not the kind of age group who would predominantly go on TikTok, being in my 40s. So I'm still learning that. So I was intrigued and interested by what you guys are putting out and the content and where you're investigating. So can you, we usually start by asking people about their origin story or how they got to where we are today. So how did the team come into being, and how did you get into the paranormal?
So it's kind of crazy. I grew up in a haunted house, so I mean, it's been something I've been surrounded by my entire life. It's been nothing new. It's nothing different, nothing crazy. I've always seen it as normal. People, they call it paranormal. It's normal to me. But growing up I grew up in central Pennsylvania. It's a primarily very historical area, an old area, and I mean, it wasn't any surprise that we grew up in a haunted house. And when we moved out to southwestern PA, where we live out now near Pittsburgh, my grandpa's house is actually haunted. So we lived there for a while. So it was just kind of like, okay, well, here we go again, But it was just kind of being immersed in that as a kid. Just kind of, I guess, gave me a better understanding. And then the TV shows came out, and I started watching them, learning about all the bigger locations and places around the U.S. and, England and Ireland and all the other places. I'm thinking, wow, there's, it's not just like something that's, I was witnessing as a kid, like this is like real, like this happens everywhere. And I've always been intrigued, kind of like wanting to do like what I always saw on TV. And when I was a kid, we went out to Gettysburg and toured the battlefield, and I asked my parents if we could do a ghost tour. So we hopped on one of the ghost tours, and actually that's where I had my first actual like documented paranormal experience, was in Gettysburg. And after that, it was kind of like, okay, I want to pursue this, but I mean, it's expensive, especially here in the U.S. with all the known locations and all the gear and everything you need. It's incredibly expensive. So I really didn't start going until the middle of the pandemic, when our government was sending out the stimulus checks, and I was like, you know what, I'm off work and we're sitting here, I'm getting all this money, like what am I else going to do? So I bought just about everything you could imagine and then started going, and now I'm traveling state to state and going from locations and meeting new people and now doing stuff like this. It's awesome.
Cool. It's interesting you say about Gettysburg. We've got some, say, friends that we've developed since we've been doing a podcast, and they've just done a documentary about the ghosts of Gettysburg. So it's interesting that you've been there. So you mentioned that your first documented sort of paranormal event happened. What happened?
So I mean, it really wasn't a whole lot. We were just seeing shadow figures and lights, and just walking around like the battle was still going on. Essentially, we were in the part of the tour that was closest to the battlefield on the edge of town, and we were just walking, and we were the last tour out, and our tour guides were all dressed, in uniform, and reenactors, and we were walking around, and I saw a light off in the distance, and it was like a flicking light, almost like an old lantern being struck, like struck in the flint. You see it strike, then it catches, and then we just see it sway back and forth, a couple of times as someone's walking with it, and then just like that, it was gone. And I'm looking at it thinking, maybe my eyes are playing tricks with me, usually 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. You never know what you're seeing. Well, when I saw it again come back the other way, I was like, okay, that's not my eyes. I'm seeing something. Well, when we saw it a third time, I realized my mom saw it too. And I looked at her and she goes, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw that. I've been seeing that. I know exactly what you're seeing." So I asked the tour guide, I said, "Hey, is there another tour over there? I keep seeing a lantern over there. Someone's walking around." He goes, "Oh no, we're the last tour of the night. There's nobody over there." I said, "No, there's somebody over there." He goes, "Yeah, it's not a living person." I was like, "Okay, thanks."
Wow. So
Yeah,
what did your mum make of it? Is she
she
into the
didn't know how
paranormal?
to think. She didn't know what at all to think. It was quite an experience because that was the first time I've physically seen something with my eyes. I've seen people like will snap pictures and it's like, oh, holy, there's something there. We've never seen that before, and stuff like that. But to physically see it with your own eyes, it's a whole different experience.
So when you were growing up, you said the house you grew up in was haunted. What sort of experiences were happening there?
At first it was just the small stuff, things moving, doors. You'll hear creak and footsteps. As I put the baseline normal paranormal activity, and so I started digging more into it and finding out it was just my grandma. She passed actually exactly 1 month before I was born, and the story behind it's crazy because I'm actually adopted. I was brought into the family after birth, and there's a spiritual belief that deceased grandparents or family members can actually help bring a child to you through adoption. And I was kind of like iffy about that until I was like talking with like a psychic medium, and he was like, he confirmed, he's like, no, she held you as a infant before you were born and put you in your parents' arms. Like that's how you came to be. I was like, that's actually kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie. And when we found out that was her, just kind of like being around, it was like I felt more comfortable. And my mom told me a story once I was older and started really, getting more in depth with the paranormal, that there was a night I was real little. I was still in a cradle, and she said that my mom or her and my dad were both pretty sick. They both had the flu, and they were both taking turns to get up to check on me and make sure I was okay and everything. And she said that it was her turn to get up one night, and in the middle of the night, and she didn't hear me crying or anything, so she thought something was wrong. And when she walked into the bedroom, she saw her mom standing at the foot of my cradle, playing with me. And she to this day, like she says, like I never believed in ghosts, but that was her. I know her face. That was my mom. And I was just like, that's incredible. Like I've never actually physically met her in life, but apparently I met her in my pre-life, I guess you can call it. It was an incredible feeling knowing that she's still around, and then going to my grandpa's house where she lived, and later on in life and find out that she's still there too. It was crazy because she just goes on her normal daily life routine as if she was still alive and still
So
playing tricks.
did she sort of come along with you to your grandfather's house, or was
More so, she followed my mom around, but yeah, she protects my brother and I like you wouldn't believe. My brother's had several close calls with he is diabetic and his sugars crashed numerous times and had very close to near death experiences, and somehow some way comes out of all of them completely unscathed, and I full-heartedly believe it's her guarding him. He was in a absolutely terrible accident a couple years ago where his car rolled and was hit by an 18-wheeler, and the car was completely totaled and destroyed, but he crawled out of the windshield and walked away without a single scratch. Not a single bruise, not a single scratch, nothing wrong with him. He got up and was walking around like he was a bystander. And when the EMS and paramedics finally arrived, they're asking the bystanders over, like around, like asking who was the driver. And I guess he walked up and goes, "Oh, I was driving." And they all looked at him like, "No, you weren't driving. There's nothing wrong with you." He goes, "No, that's my car. I was driving." And it was just an absolute miracle. And I know that was her. I know.
does your brother, does he sort of experience things, or
He's experienced things with me, but I've taken him out to a couple of locations with me a couple of times, because he's always been interested in it too. But as far as experiencing things around the house, he doesn't really talk about it, so I'm not 100% sure. I've always known that I've found it out actually last year, but now that I know about it, I've actually had the gift of being more so of a very strong sensitive. Not quite psychic level, but I pick up on energy, and they can physically, like spirits can physically talk to me. Like I'll hear it as like that subconscious voice in my head. Sometimes I'll hear it as if like you and I talking. Stuff like that. I'll see them walking around occasionally, like an actual person, but it's nothing. It's usually like your typical shadow figure, something like that, or him just walking around. It's nothing. It's nothing crazy to me. It's nothing new to me, but I've always believed that I knew that he saw stuff because we would always have similar kind of like vibe after coming out of the basement of my pap's house because that's where my grandma likes to hang out a lot. So when we would come up, he would kind of have a look on his face. I was like, something happened, but I don't know what happened. Kind of like one of those things.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell if that was physically he saw something or he heard something. I'm not sure, but he definitely had to have.
So, what sort of, obviously, you've had all these experiences growing up and that sort of got you interested in it. What made you make the next step to actually wanting to investigate it? What gave you that push to do that next level, I suppose?
It was honestly always a dream of mine, watching, Jason Hawes and Ghost Hunters, and when Zach Bagans came around and watching his show, and it always intrigued me. I've always liked the idea of going out and investigating these massive, massive hospitals and going around and doing these places. But to me, growing up around it, like it one of those things was like, I want to learn more about it because if it's happening in my house, it has to be happening in other houses. And that's why, like, I do help people. I do go do private residences when they ask. I've only done a couple. I'm new to that scene, so it's nothing like my name's not really out there yet as far as that goes. But if someone asks me like, hey, like we're experiencing stuff in my house, can you come check it out? Like I'll absolutely come out in a heartbeat. It's nothing that I'm not against. But also in the same hand, it's just one of those things that growing up, you watch the TV shows and you see these big asylums, you see these big hospitals, and you got to know these TV shows have to be somewhat scripted because you both know the paranormal doesn't happen on a dime and you can't make it happen. So just because you go to the most haunted place in the world doesn't mean you're gonna have activity that night. And you know damn well the camera's looking at them and they're looking the other way. Oh look, I just saw something. Like, did you? That's probably just for TV. So like I've always kind of felt the urge to want to go to these places myself and see if it was real or if it's fake. Because even though I'm a strong believer, I'm also a strong skeptic. I'm not going in these places expecting to get scratched, expected to see 9-foot shadow figure walking down the halls like they claim. Like I go in expecting it to not be haunted because I get a better out of it whenever I go in. Holy, that actually happened. Like I saw that. That was cool. Instead of expecting it to happen, where you're kind of like, yeah, I figured. It's just kind of like when I change that mentality of going into places, you get so much more from it, and it's been awesome. That's been my whole drive is prove it to be real. That answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. What kind of equipment do you take with you when you go to these places? What is your go-to piece of equipment?
Everything. I got REM pods. I got millimeter with the REM pod attachment. I lost my K2 meter. I had one. I left it somewhere. I don't know where it went, so I had to buy a new one. I actually use motion cameras, the hunting trail cameras. Those are the type of cameras I use because it to me, if it has enough mass to set off the trip, it's more than likely a spirit instead of a bug because bugs don't set it off, which is strange because they're a solid mass. But from what I've experienced, bugs don't set them off. So I figured, instead of putting down DVR cameras and having to watch through 12 hours of a static same shot, I can put a camera there that if something walks by it, it'll record a minute of it and take 3 pictures opposed to watching 12 hours of the same spot. So it helps cut, review down tremendously. And it's also a lot more, compact because I'm not running wires. I'm not having to worry about positioning with, outlets. And if there's even power to run my own power, stuff like that, it's just simple plug in batteries and place it and you're on your way. So, I'll use those. I got actually one of my new trigger objects is I got one of those Boo Buddies, the little teddy bears. It's like an interactive teddy bear. Kind of looks like a REM pod. That thing's fun.
Me and Ash have used one of those.
Yeah, they're fun.
Weird looking things, really. But
yeah, I got I got the spirit box, and I run a portal, one of Steve Huff Paranormal's portals. I got one of the compact ones. I mean, it's a hit or miss. I'm still trying to dabble with all the knobs and switches and trying to figure out what setting's best and what's best for what. But when it works phenomenally. I absolutely love it. some people don't like it because they feel like they get more just by listening to the static noise, but it hurts my ears, listening to that for a long period of time. So to being able to tone that down and know that you can still hear it, just not as loud. And then when a voice comes through, it's like, hey, and you're like, oh, I actually heard that, instead of your, you don't really know what you're hearing sometimes. So it helps tremendously. I like that. I have an SLS camera. I barely use it because it's not what I was expecting when I bought it. I was kind of disappointed because it was almost $600 and kind of a hefty purchase. And when I got it, I was like, oh. But I mean, it's cool to break out from time to time, but it's really, really heavy, so I don't really use it very often. I don't know if have you guys watched Destination Fear at all? The TV show?
On and off, yeah.
The paranormal music box that they use? Yeah, I got one of those as well. That thing is badass. It is so cool to use. I use that a lot. Other motion sensors, cat toy balls, stuff like that. Like I have a wide range of things, but not every investigation I use all of them. I'll bring them all, but it's kind of like whatever the spirits I feel they want to use is what I bring out. Sometimes it's just walking in with dowsing rods and calling it a night. Some days I'm lining every hall with everything and kind of see what goes. So I like bringing out the whole repertoire and let it go from there.
So you say you get a sense of what is going to work. Mm-hmm. So do you, when you get to like a location, do you sort of have a walk around and sort of take it in? Do you experience anything as you're walking around?
Depends. Some locations I've had, they're ready to go instantly, but some places it's kind of like they have to warm up to you. And that's what, good friends of mine have always told me, hey, like, you can't expect to walk into these places and then be ready to talk like you're talking to your best friend. And because I was explaining to him, like, it was really disappointing the first time we went to the West Virginia State Penitentiary. We didn't have a single thing happen the entire night until like the very end. We had like something crazy happen in the cafeteria, but I walked out like so upset because I was like, they say this is the most haunted prison in the United States, and we just were bored, senseless for 6 hours. Like, I don't get it. And that's what he told me, like, just let them come to you instead of trying to force yourself to make them, or try to force them to talk to you. And when I did that, I was like, that's really smart. So when I walk in, I kind of walk in with a clean conscience and not expecting anything. And if they come right to me immediately, then we start going. If not, I'll just kind of walk around and just mosey until they're ready. And then that's when, you pull stuff out. But I've only had really actual stuff happen twice, which is crazy. But I mean, to me, now that I know now, I've been much more places since. But it was just kind of those things where I feel as though it's just residual, kind of like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. I'm going in here now because we had a door close on its own at the end of a tour. It's kind of like, oh, hi, close. I'm going to my room. And the other one was just a ghost walk, and we were just walking through, and you could feel them walking up and down past you. You could feel the cold breeze, like everything, and a door was opening, closing multiple times on its own. As if, someone's just walking in and out. It's like they're like, oh, cool, you're here in my house. Nice to meet you. I'm going over here. But, that's about it as far as activity goes on walks. That's not very often like something will actually come up and mess with you on a walk. They respect that you're there to learn about them, and as you are learning about them. So they're not very, hands-on here, as I like to say, because some people complain about getting pushed, but you don't get that usually during the walkthrough. If you start being mouthy during the investigation, then yeah, you're going to get pushed, but that's about it.
So any bit of equipment that you found has had better or more results than others? Is like a favourite
music
equipment
box
that you use?
Music box, absolutely. That's one thing I use on every investigation, regardless how much or how little I'm using. It's always the one piece that comes out because the motion sensor in it is very strong. And if we're in a hallway, they say like, there's always a lot of shadow figures. That's where I will put that motion sensor. I'll usually pair to the motion camera sometimes too. And we'll just walk away, and then it's your do 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 do, and you're on a different floor, and you're like, bro, there's nobody down there. Like we're all right here. Like, what is going on? And that's one of my favorite things, is because it's like it's loud too, so when it's going off. It's nothing like that. It's very hard to tell, but you can hear it 2-3 floors above it, depending on the location. So it's a great piece to use on every investigation.
Can you just briefly explain what it is and what it does for those that might not have heard what
Yeah,
a
so
music box is?
absolutely. The paranormal music box, it's shaped like a coffin, and it has a very strong motion sensor on the front. And the motion sensor, when it's tripped, will actually trip the actual music to play. So it's like a music box you would see at home, like on like your grandparents' house. I always associate like my grandparents had one. So like when you would crank the handle and the tune would start playing as whatever, and then it stops. Well, with the paranormal music box, it's essentially that incorporated to a motor that's activated by the motion sensor. So when something stands in front of the sensor, it just starts playing on its own. The motor starts turning, and then when it steps away, it stops. So when something's directly in front of it compared to when something's not. It's very basic. It breaks easily because of a lot of moving parts, but it's very basic and it works tremendously.
Okay, it's interesting. You talk about the motion sensor
Mm-hmm.
and also like the trail cams
Mm-hmm.
that they get triggered. So, are you saying that? I mean, I use like trigger objects. I
Mm-hmm.
use the bear as well, and it's interesting that you would use a motion sensor when effectively a spirit isn't a solid object.
Yeah.
So,
See
so
that
yeah,
yeah, I know exactly where you're going with that. It's crazy to me how that works, but even though you can't see it, the mass is still there. And 9 times out of 10, these motion cameras can pick up the simple form of a shadow. And from what I've found out with these cameras is they kind of show themselves as a mist more times than not. And that mist is enough mass for it to set off the sensor. And it's crazy because I've tried and I've tried and I've tried and I've tried to debunk it because to me it's just it almost looks like a car going by the window and you just see like the light move across real quick, and I'm trying to look at that and trying to explain it because it's in my mind a motion camera shouldn't pick that up. It doesn't. If I had like just for instance, if I had my music box in a long hallway and there's an open window at the end of the hallway and you shined a light by it, reflecting down the hallway, that motion sensor is not going off. But if I put a camera down and you drive by and that light goes around, the camera goes off. So in my mind, I'm thinking, why is that one going off but not the other one? But when you go back and you review the footage and you see the mass of a shadow or sometimes even a whole mist like just moving across the doorway, it just leaves you in shock. I don't know how to explain it. It just I want to disprove it and say that wasn't a ghost, but when you see it like that and there's no reasonable explanation, knowing that you're the only one there and there's no vehicles or anything moving outside, it's hard to debunk. It's very tough to disprove it. I don't know.
While we're on the sort of topic of equipment, what do you make of like apps, like mobile phone apps, like Necrophonic and things like that? Is that
I
something you
use a
use?
couple of them. Yeah, I do use a couple of them. I'm not the biggest fan of them. I'll use it with the grain of salt. And I usually only use those to places that I know what kind of activity I do expect, especially like the place I'm going to in a few weeks is a place I've been to numerous times. So I'll like to pull them out and try them out there because I already know how they interact. I already know what to expect from them when they interact. So if I hear of their name or if I hear something come through it, I know that it's true because it's just them. But like if I'm going somewhere for the first time, I'm a little bit more iffy on it because I'm not 100% sure if it's a ghost or not because I don't know the area as well. So I mean, I use the iOvilus on my iPhone because it's made from digital dowsing, and one of my closest friends that is one of the people that runs the office at Hillview Manor actually spoke with the guy that developed the app and like explained to it's the same system that we put in our regular handheld ovuluses. It just whenever you're using it, it'll spit out some random words that mean absolutely nothing, but all that is it resetting the internal hard drive and the internal system just so it doesn't freeze or loop or whatever. And it'll do like if you're sitting there and there's nothing happening, you'll just hear like bacon, and you're like, what? But all that is the system just spitting something out so it doesn't like loop or freeze or anything. But you'll occasionally hear something very crazy come through. Like at Hillview, I had it running the one night, and one of my favorite residents, Bill Boots, was in one. He was in one north in one of the rooms right by the nurses station, and he usually comes out and we'll talk. And I just said, Bill, are you going to talk with me tonight? And immediately the Ovilus went bed PM, and I was like, oh well, clearly you're going to bed. I get it. The stuff like that you can credit to being real. But when you're walking down the hallway and just hear, bacon or one of the other known reset words, I'm like, really? Oh yeah, this is how this is going to go. I'm just going to turn it off now because I'm not just going to listen to this all night. But
I like the fact that you
like
you would use it in excuse me, in a known
mm-hmm.
sort of environment, or where you know what you're going to expect to hear. So then, if you do hear the word bacon or
Yeah,
cheese or whatever it might be,
yeah,
that
yeah,
you've got a frame of reference to go, well, actually I can discount that word, or that's
yeah,
not something. Okay, interesting.
yeah.
What is your take on haunted objects like dolls, and do you believe dolls or possessions like a doll can be haunted?
Yes, and it's not just dolls too. Any form of item, and it could be as simple as a pencil. Anything that could have had any form of trauma attached to it has that potential. But one thing I've definitely found out from friends that collect is just because someone advertises as haunted is not always the case. It's 1 in 100. What my friends have said. I don't. I personally the only things I collect are like artifacts from the Civil War because I'm a history freak. I love my history and learning more about the history. But I know people do collect dolls and stuff like that, and there are definitely ones that have demonic, attachments to them, which can get real fast if you're not careful. And then there's other ones that just because it's a creepy old Annabelle doll doesn't mean it's actually haunted. You know what I mean? But people will
Yeah.
collect them anyways just because they look cool, which I mean they do look cool. I can't
Yeah,
discredit that,
yeah,
but
some of them do. Yeah,
I would just be careful because you never know what you're getting ever.
you mentioned that you collect artifacts like Civil
Mm-hmm.
War artifacts. Do you get a sense when you're handling or getting a new piece of or new artifact, whatever it may
Mm-hmm.
be? Do you get a sense that there was trauma on with the person who was
Mm-hmm.
using it, or
Yeah, because it's funny when you go to Gettysburg. There's shops on every corner that sell them, as you would imagine, and a lot of them just say dug up on battlefields, and a lot of them are from the South. Some throughout Virginia, as every battle took place in Virginia about, and some of them were just dug up and throughout the South in general, so they weren't exactly from Gettysburg. But when I was just there in March I was in the area because I had a ghost hunt nearby, and I went into a shop and they actually had artifacts that were dug up on the battlefield, and that's a big deal to people like me because the whole town's protected by the National Park Service. So anything that, like, if you were to walk down the road or not down the road, but like you're on the battlefield and you find a bullet, you're by law have to turn it in. You can't keep it because it's protected ground. So to be able to buy something that was physically dug up on those grounds, it's something. I mean, people always make fun of you because it's no more than a small, barely this big cannonball fragment, and you look at it like that's a piece of rock. I said, no, it's a shell. I can promise you that. It's heavy as hell and it's rounded. You can see the grooves still a little bit. It's definitely a fragment of a cannonball. And like, well, why'd you spend $50 on it? I said, because it was dug up here in Gettysburg. Like this was actually shot, blown up, and could have potentially killed somebody right here in Gettysburg. That's why I spent the $50 on it. Like that's cool as hell to me. But when I held that for the first time, like you feel the energy around it because this came from this ground, like where the other ones that I bought there, they were cool and all, but they didn't really have any feel to them because it was as simple as someone dropped them and they just fell into the ground, and that's where they remained until someone dug them up 160 years later. It all depends. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll find one. You're like, whoa, like this is cool. And there's other ones like, oh look, I found a bunch of old bullets. It all depends. But that cannonball, I love it. I absolutely love that.
that's awesome.
The places that have had sort of this sort of history and more trauma,
Mm-hmm.
are they more prone to have things going on like hauntings and maybe somewhere that's not seeing any sort of action like that?
I mean, yes and no. Sometimes I found out that they can choose where they want to haunt. just because you died as a soldier in Gettysburg doesn't mean you're going to stay and haunt in Gettysburg. Maybe you felt more connected with your home, so you decide to go back and haunt your childhood home, or whatever. It's not always the case like that, but it's usually the people that die suddenly tend to stay there because they don't understand that they're dead yet. Which is usually the case with battlefields, as you'd imagine. You're walking a line, you're alive. The next thing you know, you're not. It just happens at a blink of an eye. So that's why a lot of these battlefields are notoriously haunted. But it's funny because not all of them are haunted. Which to me, I was kind of like strange. I was like, "What do you mean? Like, it's the same concept, just a different place." Because when we were in Manassas, Virginia, on our way home from vacation, I got to tour the battlefield there at Bull Run, and I know it was the first major battle of the war. I know that the casualties were through the roof, especially in the second battle of Manassas the following year. But there was no real heavy energy there. It just, I was kind of like, you're just there, and you're like, you can see where it was, and the remembrance of it. We toured one of the old houses where they were literally cutting arms and legs off of people, and there's still engravings in the ground in the floorboards from the soldiers, leaving their mark. But there's no energy there from them at all. And anything that it's the family that lived in that house that's still like, this is my home. And it just kind of like, how, what do you mean? Like, their blood's here. Like, it's still in this land. Like, how are they not physically here? But I guess that's just their choice of moving on and saying, this isn't the place I want to be. Not saying that it's not haunted, but that would explain why it's not as haunted as Gettysburg or some of the other major battlefields, And I think it all depends on the area too. Gettysburg's a very large area with a lot of foot traffic, and it's a town, so there's a lot of energy, the electrical wires and stuff like that. So maybe that's easy for them to feed off of, and that's why Gettysburg's so haunted. And with Antietam, you have the creek, you have the town too, which makes sense of why Antietam's like Gettysburg with being very haunted. That's a possibility too. But it's crazy. You go to these places, and you never know what you're going to walk into. It's strange.
So we do, like I mentioned before we started, that we do a Paranormal United States episode every week, like just a short form, 10 minutes roughly, where we go state by state. And the one thing that comes up a lot is penitentiaries, sanitariums, or some kind of hospital.
Exactly.
And we always attribute those to where sort of a major trauma has happened, like cruelty or horrible deaths and such like. So it's interesting you talk about Gettysburg, but also the fact that you've been to the other places and there is no sort of sense of anything there. So do you find when you go to locations, if there's a history of like extreme trauma of whatever kind, do you get a sense of whether or not you're more likely to have activity, and whether that activity is sort of more of a good sort of feeling, or a bad sort of, almost sort of towards demonic kind of?
I haven't really dealt with much demonic, but there's definitely dark energy at these places too, and it's usually a little bit of both, because the histories runs deep in these places, and kind of actually connects to a story I'd like to tell you when we're done here, with this little segment right here. But a lot of these places I go to originally opened as a county poor farm, as a county home for people that couldn't afford to live on their own and help the mentally ill and destitute and stuff like that. And you have everything from orphans to grown adults that just can't take care of themselves. So you can only imagine, what could have possibly went between those. I mean, everywhere's run different. Some places were fantastic and took great care of their residents, and there were still going to be, your bad apples, and there's still going to be death and what have you. But there's other places like the prominent ones I've been to have been run by more so a dictator that doesn't give a damn about his people, and he's just there for the power. And you have everything from disease to murder to suicide to the administration killing and covering it up as a suicide. And when you have that stuff, it's heartbreaking, because you walk into these places and they're telling you like, hey, like, I want you to know that I was hurt, I died here, like, I'm still here, can you please help me, I'm hurting still. and then you that's when you that's where like a lot of my activity will come from these places, and then you'll occasionally get, get back to your damn room. Oh, I'm still in charge here. And then everything goes from a light, somber, feel to like, hey, I'm here to help you, to, okay, somebody that is not very kind is now here because the whole room is darker than, the midnight sky. So you have both. A lot of these places are like that, especially penitentiaries. You'll have, you know, I'm sure you guys know about, people who are sometimes wrongfully accused and wrongfully locked up, and more times than not, those are the easy bait to be killed. So sometimes when you walk into a prison, you will get the occasional, hey, I wasn't supposed to be here. Can you help me move on? Like, I feel guilty, whatever. And then there's the other ones, like, your typical bad apple that you would expect in a prison. So you really have to know what you're dealing with before you approach, how you want to investigate.
So what was the story you alluded to?
Yeah, so
Just then.
When I was at Rolling Hills Asylum last fall, we were speaking with a psychic medium there. And I told her, I said, it's crazy. Ever since I got into the paranormal, there's always been 5 places that interest me the most. All 5 are poor farms. All 5 turned out to be, county asylums or, some form of health facility afterwards. And all have like literally the same storyline of corruption. And it's just crazy to me because it's like I almost feel connected to these places. And she went, "Oh, you're adopted." I was like, "Excuse me, how did you know that?" And she goes, "Well, in your past life, you died as an orphan, and you died on a poor farm, and this is your calling to come back to these places to tell their stories."
Wow.
And I looked at her and I was like, "What?" I was like, "That's way too much to process at once." But she's like, "It makes sense, though." I mean, she goes, "What are your 5 places?" I said, "Well, one, growing up and living in the Pittsburgh area, it's always been Hillview Manor. Everybody knows about Hillview Manor. I've always wanted to come here to Rolling Hills Asylum. That's my top 2. And then more recently, I learned of the new place I go to a lot, Fairfield County Infirmary. And then there's Enberg Manor out in Missouri. And then there's Greene County Poor Farm near me, and it's like 20 minutes from me." And she went, "Well, yeah, that makes sense. They all had orphans, and they were all poor farms and all that." And she was, "Well, I think you're from one of them." I said, "Don't start this shit. Do not start this shit not now." And she goes, "No, I'm serious. Like, that's why you're going to these places, to tell their stories, to know that you were like them that died there." So I was like, okay, this is weird. Like, I don't know how I feel about this whole, right, coming on me like right now like this. So I thought about it, and I decided, what? Now that I'm strong enough and understand my gift now of being able to channel energy and talk to spirits, I actually found out I do have a spirit attachment, and it's nothing bad. It's nothing evil like people always claim. He's literally my best friend. It's funnier than hell. But I use him to kind of help channel, and learn more about certain things. And I started having like really weird dreams about, like an old like stone staircase that led to like a dungeon. And I was like, this is really strange. Well, I didn't really put 2 and 2 together because the location I was going to that week was the Greene County Poor Farm near me. And when we got there and started touring it, this staircase to the basement's an old stone staircase that leads to the dungeon. Wow. And it's not like on TV when Destination Fear went there. It doesn't look a lot like that. It's kind of like an old. It's preserved perfectly because the County Historical Society operates the building now, so it's all pristine in a museum and all that. And we're walking into that staircase, it just kind of got dizzy, got a little uneasy. I was like, I don't know if I like this place. This isn't this. There's something off here. Well, found out from this tour guide that there's 17 confirmed deaths of little children that were pushed down the stairs. Wow. And half of them died down in the dungeon when they were locked up, and the other half died at the bottom of the stairs because of injuries. And I'm thinking to myself, I was like, oh, God, if this is the place, I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, later that night, found out it is actually where I believe I did die at a past life. I have strong connections through my spirit, and other things that are happening were pointing towards it, because I kept having like a voice in my head saying, you weren't supposed to know, you weren't supposed to come here. And that's kind of like what made me very uncomfortable, because I'm thinking, okay, well, something's about to attack me, because why would I be warned like this? Like, something isn't right about this place. And sure enough, at the end of the night, we were eavesdropping on the group that was in the basement just to see what they were catching in their EVP session. And the staircase is very strange. It's not like your traditional staircase. It's kind of like you open a door to go into like the landing to go down the steps. And my one friend was standing there, and their friend was standing on the staircase. And I peeked my head out and looked down the hallway just for God knows what reason. I couldn't even tell you. Just kind of like I felt like I had to. And there was a 6'4" figure standing right there in the middle of the hallway, completely black, and all you saw was the outline. And I said, "You're not supposed to be, like, you're not with us, like, you're not supposed to be here. You better leave us alone." And sure enough, you watch it turn and hightail into a room, and I was like, "Holy hell, that was actually a figure." I thought I was actually seeing things. So I started getting nervous because I knew exactly where we were. So I grabbed my friend. I said, "We need to go, and I need to go now." I was like, "I'm not playing around. Like, I'm not the one to leave, but I need to leave." "Well, hold on, let me grab so-and-so." I said, "No, you don't understand. I need to leave." So, they went to reach for their friend and say, "Hey, like, we got to get him out of here." And the second, as the friend was coming up the steps, I turned and looked again and saw the figure closer this time, and full-fledged charged straight at me, backing me back into that stairwell. And I would have fell down those stairs if my friend wasn't standing there.
Wow.
And
So
it was just one of those things. So that's how I believe how I died in the past life, was I fell down or I was pushed down those steps, and that's where I died.
Wow.
Yeah,
How
it
do you
was
even
absolutely
process
incredible.
that?
It was absolutely incredible. I've never experienced anything like that ever in my life in any location. And ever since then, when I go to these places that have known orphans, and we're, in a sense, an orphanage, that's one area I cannot go into without crying, because I feel that energy and I know what they went through. And it's heart-wrenching.
Wow. So so you're 100% sure that was the place where in a previous life you resided and
And
passed away?
didn't even
Wow.
make, apparently, I don't know an exact age, but considering that every time I go to these places, I'm a magnet for little kid spirits, it makes me think that I didn't even make it to my teenage years, somewhere probably
Wow.
between 6 to 11.
Wow.
I never considered like sort of thinking on this. We talked to quite a few people about past lives and
Mm-hmm.
having multiple lives, but I suppose in this sort of instance, you could actually possibly communicate with your own past life.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
something I
mm-hmm.
never really clicked that is something that could be possible.
Yeah,
And
it is
obviously,
possible.
and obviously, because obviously we're not. Most of us obviously don't know about past lives. It's hard to find that out. But I suppose when you do, that
Mm-hmm.
that possibility is there, and that's just wow. Just
That's where it also kind of plays with reincarnation, because sometimes people come back as somebody else, but you still have the exact same personality as you did in that past life. And that to me is a whole nother ballpark that I don't really know much about, but I've heard stories online, of like listening to people talk like on podcasts and just tell their story and stuff. It just I don't know how this works, or how it is to come to be that you're the chosen one to be the next, and to continue that story. But I was reading one of a little boy who was only 5 years old, 4 years old, and how little kids are. They have the curious mind, and they have their own personalities. Well, this kid was telling detailed stories about the Battle of Midway. Like, what 4-year-old knows the ins and out of a fighter that took place in the middle of the Pacific in 1943, 1942? Like, come on. And then I guess he started, the mom was like, "Oh, honey, that's funny. You must have seen, your TV show with your dad or something, whatever." And then he said, "No, like, I'm Lieutenant so-and-so, whatever. He died in Midway." And she's like, "Oh, what?" And they've actually found like the bloodline of like the sister was still somehow living, like when she was like 98, 99 years old or whatever. And she agreed to sit down with him, and he was like just going on and on and on and on about every little detail, to the carrier he was on, to what his plane looked like, to the numbers on the plane, and the gauges and what they did and everything like that. And she went, "You can't convince me that wasn't him. Like, that was my
Wow.
brother through and through in this little boy's body." And I was just like mind blown. I was like, wow, it's real. Like, that's fascinating. And then you hear someone go, well, that happened to me too. I'm like, shut up. No, you know, but
But
like, it just like, when you hear the stories, it's incredible.
how interesting, though, that you sort of reside such a short distance from where.
Exactly. The hospital
So,
is born that's 25 minutes from.
and that is crazy, isn't it? And the fact
Yes, it
that
is.
you're adopted, so
Mm-hmm.
you potentially could have gone anywhere
Exactly.
realistically as a small child before you were adopted
Mm-hmm.
out. You could have gone anywhere, but you, for some reason, you've gone to your parents'
Yeah.
family, and it's so close to where you were before.
Yep.
Have you had thoughts about trying to? Obviously, it's quite an emotional thing, and I can't imagine how you process that. But have you thought about going back there, specifically trying to, like Ash said, almost try and communicate with your past life?
Yeah, I've put thought in it, and it's going to be a thing that it's not going to be anytime soon because it was just a very, 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 traumatizing
Mm,
experience. And
yeah,
I'm not the one to get like that because I love going to these places and I love going back and answering these questions. And I've even at, like Moundsville, and I felt very unsafe at the prison. I still turned around and went right back the following year just because it's fascinating. But this was a completely different ball field. It was one of those things that maybe next year, maybe the year after, maybe I'll decide to go back and do that. But it's just one of those things where, with what happened and being told by my ghost like 2 days later that that was your killer that chased you, kind of that answered the question that I had.
yeah.
And to me, it's kind of like I don't feel welcome back, and I don't know if I want to go back. But if I have the right group with me, and I've my right friends with me, then maybe I'll consider going back. But I can definitely not be left alone in that building. That is for sure.
There's a whole nother level to just going on a public
Hmm.
investigation or somewhere
Yeah,
else. That couldn't be more of a personal experience, really. So
yeah,
yeah, I don't blame you for that, especially if you kind of got some answers
yeah,
on that that that
yeah.
visit. So
Exactly.
wow, yeah,
It
well,
makes you
we've
think.
never, yeah, it does. We've never, and like Ash said, I hadn't even thought about that question
Yeah,
about the fact that you might be interacting in some way with your previous self.
yeah,
That's that's kind of mind blowing. And we've
yeah.
never spoken to anybody. I mean, we've spoken to people who have been claimed to be reincarnated or have this reincarnation journey, but nobody
Hmm.
who's almost had the proof that it's happened to them. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that with us, because obviously
Absolutely.
that is
It's
a
yeah,
super personal sort of
yeah.
experience that
Yeah, it's
nobody
personal,
else can
but
really get.
also
Yeah.
it helps people open up too. I found out whenever yeah, I know I sound like a lunatic when I tell people the story because not everyone believes in it the way we do. But I know what I experienced. I know damn well there's other people out there that have experienced something like that, and I think that like it's now like with my goal with the paranormal. When I go into these places, like I want them to know that they're not forgotten, and I can be their vessel as a voice, you know. And I know my ghost is okay with me, maybe if another one wants to tag along, whatever. Like I know my one friend, she has 8, that follow her around. They're all British soldiers from the Revolution too. I think there's 2 or 3 from the Revolution, and she has 2 that are from the Civil War that are Confederate, and 2 that are Union. And it just kind of like we latched the soldiers apparently because mine's a Confederate soldier from Alabama who's originally from Ireland. So
Oh
it's kind
wow.
of like one of those things it was just a strange thing that's just how it happened to be. But when I go to these places, like they know they can use me to talk to. And when when it's just one of those things that they can use the energy to tell what they want to tell and say what they need to say, and that kind of either helps them move on or helps them know that hey, like we're not forgotten, like we are able to talk. And that kind of happened last April, I think it was, when I was at Fairfield. I went. This will be number 3 this year for me when I go in a couple of weeks. But when we went, we were sitting in the old jail cell on the women's side, And we were just sitting there, and my one friend was under doing the Estes method, and there's this, me and the other friend were asking the questions, and we were sitting there, and I just randomly went, "Oh, they were shot outside back in the field." And he looked at me and was like, "What?" And then right after, we heard a very loud scream outside. And I said, "Yeah, that was, he got shot. That was the next, like, he was executed." And the book said it was a suicide. And right after, our friend with us under the Estes method, who obviously can't hear anything, just went, "Suicide out back, not real."
Wow.
And my friend looked at me and I said, "I told you." It's like, I'm not pulling this out of my ass. Like, I told you. And then we'll hear, like, "Help me. I'm hurting." "Well, what happened?" "I was murdered." And I was like, oh, God. This is how tonight's going to go. We're going to be playing, the healer, for say, tonight, instead of, kind of trying to find something new. We're going to be helping tonight, which is perfectly fine. But, sometimes, investigations can take a turn that you don't expect. So it's just kind of one of those things where I was not expecting to be that kind of person that night. I was kind of hoping to kind of find something new. But, I mean, hey, we still got a lot out of it, and we were able to help a few people out too, so which was pretty neat.
So when you find out stuff like that, where you get, so the death has been in the log books or the history books that the person committed suicide, but then you find out that potentially that wasn't the case. Is that the kind of information that you would give to, like, the trust or whoever looks after the building? Or
Yeah, it all depends on the location. Like, because Fairfield County Infirmary, it's owned by a guy named Adam Kimmel. He also owns Madison Seminary, and he's on the board running Paranormal Indiana State Sanatorium and a couple other locations. So, like, he's involved with a lot of different places. And he knows just as much as we know of what went on in these places. The books were very poorly kept back in the day. A lot of times, if it was real corrupt, when they were finally pushed out of the place, they would burn or tamper with the books just so the truth wouldn't fully get out. So then that's when we come in handy, because then we can kind of put the pieces back together and find out little by little, what actually happened there. And places like Hillview Manor, they like knowing the truth, because then they can properly tell their story on their tours and whatnot. But also, in the same hand, when you go to Fairfield County Infirmary, it's not. They just opened a few years back. Adam got the building and was finally able to start running investigations there. This was their. He usually does a Paracon every year at the locations, and this was his second year at Fairfield. So he just recently got it, and it's almost like we're still learning the story of the building too. It closes as like a doctor's office, like a county health building. So, there's not. It's kind of like you can tell the remnants of the poor farm, but it's still kind of set up like it was, a physician's office. So it's kind of like hard to tell, like, what you're dealing with, or even even if they even have books, nobody really knows. But it's kind of cool to let them know, like, hey, like, we found out so and so that that was believed to have been a suicide wasn't actually a suicide, or hey, I know about this said spirit who said it was killed here. Well, they were actually killed here. And it's kind of those things where when they talk about them on their tours, they kind of have better information. But when we go to Hillview Manor, there's I hope they don't mind me telling the story, but it was one of the prominent spirits, Angelo, was always said to be one of the ones that killed himself on the second floor left wing bathroom, where that found out was not the case whatsoever. He was actually killed in the former morgue on the third floor by the superintendent, and was hung in that bathroom by the superintendent, and then they put it up as a suicide to cover up the fact that they murdered him.
wow.
And we found that out actually completely by accident. And when we told them, like, you're the third person to come to us that actually have found that out.
Oh,
and they said, coincidentally, you're one of 5 people Angelo likes to talk to. So, I mean, I would credit that as being pretty factual. And I was like, whoa, I was not expecting that. But, it's just kind of cool to know that when you go to these places a lot, they have, like, they recognize you as a friend, they know you. and you'll start squeezing more information out than some random Joe that'll walk into the building might get. You can walk into a place for the first time and hear your footsteps, the doors, and floorboards and bangs and screams and what have you. But when you go back a second time, there'll be, oh, hey, I remember you, let's talk. And then you'll start getting EVPs, you'll start getting more voices. And if you go back a third time, then it won't just be them. You're going to have a group of people coming to you, and so on and so forth. And I think that's why I like going back to places 3, 4, 5, 6 times, because it's that interaction of them knowing you and they trust you with their story. And that's the way I look at it, because people always ask me, why do you go to Hillview Manor so much? Well, that's exactly why. Like, every time I go, yeah, I know what's going to happen. I know that building like it's the back of my hand. But when you go there, it's like they're like, oh, hey, I have a new story for you today. And I like that sometimes more than going in blind to a new location. Yeah, I like to travel. I like to see new spots. I want to see as many places as I can. But there's also something about going back to that same spot and getting that kind of kick of like saying like, okay, I'm in a comfort zone. That's the part that's neat to me.
The when you talked about the soldiers that have attached themselves to you and your friends, and you mentioned, for example, the one from Alabama that's originally from Ireland, have you been able to like trace that person, like maybe on the internet or in books, and find out who exactly that person was from Ireland and stuff like that?
I have his full military file. I know pretty much about everything there is to know about him. It's crazy. His parents were first, like, they came over from Ireland and resided in Birmingham, Alabama. And he was born in Alabama, but he comes from that strong Irish family. So his accent's funny because it's like that typical Southern accent with an Irish twist to it. So I love it personally. It's a really cool accent. But when people hear him talk, they're all like, "Who the hell was that?" I said, "Oh, don't worry. That's just don't worry about him. He's just doing his thing." But people don't fully understand yet that he's actually here all the time. It's kind of cool to me, but other people don't really fully understand that yet. But I found his full military file online to find out like if this was actually him or what his full name was. Because when we first found out about him, we were actually trying to find out my friend's one attachment, and we were asking about him, where he's from, and everything. And he told us Virginia. So when we were trying to channel the energy to find more about the Virginia story, he came through and here, Alabama. And I said, wait a second here. Who's from Alabama? I thought you just said you're from Virginia. And then went, no, like, I'm yours. And I looked at my friend. I said, I don't have an attachment that I know of. And then he goes, and then it kind of went from there. And I started talking more about it and figuring it out. And sure as shit, the one soldier that we both were kind of experiencing found out that was actually mine. So I went online, I found his full military file, found out his name, like his full name, what company he was in, where he was staged, where he fought, where like his whole footsteps through the whole war, his rank, what rank he started at, where he was stationed, where he camped, throughout the different states and stuff. And it was, incredible to find that whole journey just by one simple search.
Amazing.
It is. It truly is amazing. And it's funny because I actually picked him up when I was 13 when we went to the Antietam battlefield. And the part that I found funny was like his company was held in reserve at Antietam. They didn't actually see combat until 1865, towards the end of the war. But they were at Antietam. They were at Gettysburg. They were at Cold Harbor. They were at, some of these known bigger battles, but they just didn't see action. They were held in reserve. And it wasn't until 65 when they were used in the defenses of Savannah, Georgia. And I kind of wondered, I was like, well, why is he attached to me then? And I found out that, thinking back, when I was a little boy, and I didn't really give too much of a rat's ass about the Civil War. I was more of a World War II person. I loved learning about the Battle of Britain and, the whole, that whole slew of history, and then learning more so about the Pacific theater of things with the U.S. and all that. And then all of a sudden I was like, we went and did Gettysburg, and then I started doing Civil War classes in school. The next thing you know, I wanted to go to Antietam, and then next thing you know, I learned about, and honestly, like, kind of was like an obsession back then about the Irish Brigade and the Irish involvement in the American Civil War. And it just kind of weird to me, like, how that just came out of nowhere. And it's like, oh, I love this now. I never knew about it. I never cared about it. I never wanted to learn about it, but I love it. and I found out that was actually him because I picked him up in Antietam. And the first shirt I bought in Antietam was actually an Irish Brigade shirt.
Wow.
And it was kind of a funny coincidence to me thinking back that that was probably him saying, hey, this is, my way of telling you, but without telling you, and it just kind of grew from there. And I started going to the places. Now I collect Irish Brigade shirts. And when we went to Fredericksburg, which is, I don't know how much you guys know about the American Civil War, but Fredericksburg was one of the bloodiest battles of the American Civil War for us. The Union got absolutely destroyed because they didn't want to move on the town. They waited, they waited, they waited. Next thing you know, the Confederates took the high ground, and they had to just basically walk up a very large hill, eating cannon and musket fire the whole way, and majority of the regiments lost 40 to 50%. And one of the ones that everyone talks about is the charge of the Irish Brigade, because they showed discipline and stayed in their ranks and held their line as long as they could before having to forcefully be pushed back because their numbers were just way too extreme. And everyone incorporates the Irish Brigade with Fredericksburg, which is understandable, but they were also just as notable at Gettysburg. They were notable in Antietam. They were involved in 9 different engagements, and there's Irish on both sides of the conflict. They say it's a fictional division because there wasn't a said actual Irish Brigade in the Confederacy, but there were several companies that were 70% Irish. So they were on both sides of the battle, and they actually shot at each other in Fredericksburg. There was a whole company from Georgia that was majority Irish that was on the stone wall in Mary's Heights that actually fought the Union Irish Brigade in the same battle. And I can only imagine what that had to have been like, knowing that, your own countrymen are shooting at each other on different sides of the flag.
Weird.
Yeah. Crazy. And then,
so do you believe that you may have sort of been guided to a lot of the stuff that you're doing?
absolutely.
And do you hear, you mentioned, sorry to interrupt you, do you hear the voice from outside your head, or like an inner monologue inside your head?
Both.
If that makes sense. Both.
If it's like an area, like, because he swore like to my role is to protect me, like a guardian angel would, because he is a guardian angel to me. I tell him that all the time. But he also respects that like my girlfriend doesn't fully feel comfortable with being around this stuff yet, and she doesn't know how to feel yet about me having him around all the time. But it's not that not like I can handle it, but like it just the matter of the fact. So like he will usually just kind of be from afar and talk to me like through like that voice in your head if he needs to tell me something. And if I'm home alone, he'll just be walking around, and I'll hear him talking out in the hallway, or I'll hear something fall and I know it's him because he's extremely clumsy like me. Stuff like that. It all depends. Like when we were on vacation, he was just walking around, and all my friends that were with us from her family kept asking, like, hey, who was that walking around over there? I said, oh, it's just Jamie. Don't worry. He's just protecting the grounds. He's just, just doing his little patrol. It's fine. And they're like, who's Jamie? I said, my ghost. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. I said, what? There's nothing to worry about. What, are you scared? And yeah, a little bit. Then right behind, boom! And he was, oh, what the hell was that? I said, that was him.
Wow.
He's gonna pick on you now because you openly said that you're scared. Like, and it's funny because I'm the same way. I'm an asshole. I'll pick on you. I'll torture you, especially if you're someone I know really well. I will absolutely have that fun and pick on you. And it's hilarious because that's how he was. He was clumsy. I'm clumsy. He was an asshole. I'm an asshole. It's just so fitting. It's crazy how that works too. But we're one and the same too. It's really neat.
Definitely.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Sage, for sharing all that with us. It's been fascinating, and some topics and sort of thoughts we've not thought about before. So it's been really insightful. So where can our listeners find your TikToks and your paranormal group on?
I got my page up on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, but I'm primarily active on Instagram and TikTok the most. My Facebook page is kind of just there just in case I decide to grow, more and dabble with YouTube and have that page to back up. But you can primarily find me on Instagram and TikTok.
What's the page?
The handle's Still City Ghost Chasers.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again. Thanks for taking time to chat to us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Pursuit of the Paranormal with Ash and Greg.